That's where I really see the gap in the market understanding right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of these things where you should be thinking anything that's a legally binding document, you should have this on.
So I'm here with Jim Weisser. Jim is the CEO and founder of SignTime. Jim, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. A little bit damp with the typhoon, but otherwise good.
Yeah, I had to make the decision to wear shoes or not wear shoes because of how wet they are, and I don't want to get the carpet dirty. So.
Well, appreciate you taking one for the team today. I know it's a rough call.
Got my shoes on for you.
I got my coat on for you. So
Thank you. Yeah, so today I wanted to talk to you about a few different topics, and starting with kind of DX in Japan. What are some of the trends that you've seen, as well as diving a bit deeper into SignTime specifically and how that fits into that landscape. Mm-hmm. And then also talk about some of the talent that you're maybe looking for in the market right now for SignTime. And then in the second part of the conversation, I wanted to dive into some more cultural elements, specifically around the multiple businesses that you've started in Japan, managing a team managing an international team in Japan, and how those expectations might clash that are coming from Silicon Valley.
Right.
Cool. So yeah, let's get started. DX, you want to intro yourself? Actually, I feel like
Sure. No, not a problem. I mean, it's always one of the challenges when you're introducing someone you've known a while.
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of like, all right. Well, I grew up in Texas, and I came to Japan in the 90s. I had the chance. I was lucky to get into the internet round one or .com one or whatever you want to call it, 90s. And then I started my first business in 2000, completely flopped in Japan. Then in 2003, I started a second one, started a third in 2006. I later sold to Broadsoft, which was now part of Cisco. Mm-hmm. After doing that, I stayed at Cisco until 2019. Left and started SignTime in 2020. Awesome. So far so good. And I'd also DX is digital transformation for the folks who aren't used to the abbreviation.
I talked about this recently, but I didn't realize that was like a Japan thing until because I just Googled it and it came up, and so I assumed like, okay, this is like a universal term, but it's not used that much outside of Japan, really.
Well, I mean, Japan's a fairly unique operating environment, right? I mean, we were talking about that some before we actually met today, and I think there's already a tendency to shorten things, and transformation in katakana is really long.
Yeah.
So if you just make X equal change, then all right, fine.
Exactly. So to get things started, kind of around that topic. We were speaking a bit before about PBXL, which is one of the businesses, the one that you ended up selling to Broadcom. Mm-hmm. And I just wonder if you could maybe touch a little bit on what PBXL was, and then we could talk about kind of how that leads into even like the infrastructure as you're talking about for digital transformation.
Right. So PBXL was a hosted PBX company that I set up in Japan in 2006. We thought we were like 2 years late to market. At that point, we were like, this is going to happen any day now. And in retrospect, let's see, I sold in 15, like 13 might have been the right time, 12, somewhere around there would have been the right time to set up. So we were probably, 6 or 7 years early versus the market. With all the Corona COVID stuff that's come out over the last year, you've seen more of a move that way and some more moves towards soft methods of communication. But yeah, we were pretty early on in the game. And as you know, Japan's a very kind of hardware mindset culture. So, for us, there were a lot of things that we did here that might not have been as common as some other places. And in many other countries, you saw people go 100% soft phone. A lot of things on the smartphone. It's kind of an overlay. But in Japan, it was very much phones on the desk. And actually, I still remember when we started, I was like, right, this is IP telephony. We're going to be good. We don't have to do fax. Day two, talking to 2 different customers, was like, okay, great, we're good now. How do we connect our fax? And we're like, oh, you don't, because fax, that's really old.
We have email.
Yeah, we have email, we have lots of ways. They're like, no. How do we connect our fax? Right, let me get a quote out to you on that. Yeah. The last thing I would do is kill my first couple of sales because I can't connect faxes.
So it's funny that you mentioned that we, one, still have a fax machine. It's, I think, in the shop actually today. And two, we didn't get rid of our hard phone lines until the pandemic essentially. It's like, I guess early 2020 was, and it was actually like a kind of a happy coincidence because we decided to switch, I think, at the beginning of 2020, and it just happened to really coincide with like when we would have to not be in the office. Yeah, it's super interesting that you mentioned how you feel like you were maybe early when you kind of thought you were late, and I feel like that kind of speaks to this view of, or how maybe the progress of DX in Japan and how it has been a bit slower. I think people have said that a lot, but what I want to talk about now is just what are some of the trends that you're seeing? I know like passbooks and banking was kind of one of the ones that we had talked about before. Yeah, maybe if you want to just...
Well, I think that's a good example to start with. 10 years ago, I was doing a briefing for, I don't know, 20 or 30 college students who were coming to Japan on some program. And I mentioned as a throwaway line at the end, after running through financial services here and showing them from a very modern bank, that most of Japan still operated on passbook savings.
Mm-hmm.
And like, they're looking at each other like, what? Yeah. And like finally I was like, excuse me, Mr. Weisser, what's passbook savings? And so we literally walked, like, here, you just all follow me. And we walk to the bank down the street. And I show them the machine that takes the passbook in and out. You see those paper things that people are carrying with them. Those are passbooks.
Yes.
And then about 2 years ago, maybe 3, I started seeing an ad for digital passbook savings. And I was like, okay, that's kind of very Japan level 1 digital savings, right? But so many things here are built around very strong and deep paper processes that moving those digital has been very hard.
I totally know what you mean.
Right.
It's funny that you mentioned the passbook because I didn't know what that was until I moved to Japan. And my wife, like, we have like 3 different passbooks at this point. One for my account, one for my daughter's account, one for my wife's account.
Right.
And it's like, yeah, it's kind of overwhelming, and budgeting is tough. And we actually were fortunate enough to be able to buy an apartment or a mansion, they call it here, the last year. And dealing with that was like, it was eye-opening, honestly, just to see how much paper is involved in not just like the budgeting, but like the contracts and there's, I don't know if we've talked about this here, but in Japan, and I think you and I had this conversation, I don't know if we talked about it on the podcast, there's like a meeting that you have to go to, and you have to bring the down payment in cash to the meeting and have that over. And that was like so surreal to me. Like, I could not, it was hard to process initially. Like, okay, wait, we're going to have to get like $30,000 in cash. I had to go to the ATM, like, right, I use a digital bank in Japan. And so like I had to go to the ATM and just get 30,000 in cash. And that was like, first of all, that's the most money I've ever seen in my life in one place. Second of all, it was like kind of soul crushing how small of an amount of money that actually was. Like in the movies, you see them have like a briefcase. Right. We had like 2 envelopes. And that was like,
Big envelopes.
yeah. It fit like in my wife's purse, and I was just like, man, like, don't go anywhere. You go straight to the meeting and you come back. But yeah, I know that you had something.
No, when we also bought our apartment back in the early 2000s, it was the same kind of thing. It's like, and I brought along a knapsack or something like, this is my dedicated tools. Yeah, I'm running around like a Mission Impossible guy with it, like, and it's Japan. There's no actual threat. Yeah, however, I'm very, very aware that I'm putting life savings worth of money in cash at the moment. So yeah.
Yeah, it's heavy, and it's so surreal to me that process like is not digital really at all. Actually, like it's so limited. We had to get another bank account to get the loan, and it was it's all still incredibly paper based.
Well, when you were doing that, did you have a special thing read to you as well? Was there like a long statement that they had to read literally word for word?
My wife went to the meeting. I didn't go to the meeting because I was fearful that I was going to fall asleep.
Yeah.
That was okay. Did you go to that?
Yeah, I went to that meeting, and that was challenging.
It's like,
one of the reasons I ask is in my business that required physical reading on premise with someone there, maybe falling asleep, maybe not, is actually an impediment to digital transformation because the law is written such that it assumes a face-to-face transaction.
Yeah, I totally agree. And from there, I think that's a good kind of lead into what SignTime does. And so maybe if you could talk a little bit, give an intro there of what you guys are doing, and then we can talk about maybe some of the stuff that you have in the pipeline.
Yeah, so SignTime is an e-signatures offer focused on Japan. Now we're globalized, so we're doing, we have customers that aren't just in Japan. But we looked at the market here back in 2018, actually, my business partner and I, and he'd actually built a e-signature company in the United States in 2009 or 2010, sold it in 2014. Great experience. And he knew that I was starting to come towards the end of my time at Cisco. So he's like, hey, what are you going to do next? And we talked about it in 2018, and I was like, well, there's no obvious catalyst. And since I was 6 years early in my last business, I don't want to be, I'm much older now than I was then. So even if I'm only 6 years early, and I thought that one it might have been 10, that would mean that I'd be 90 at the point that we have some success with the business. And that was a little bit slow for me. Even, Japan operates on geologic timescales, but still, that was a bit.
I totally understand.
So we basically both backburnered it. And I left Cisco and I was doing some other things. And then in 2020, the pandemic hits. And some of the things that I was doing actually needed an e-signature solution. And so I reached out to him basically the same day he was reaching out to me. And I was like, did you ever do that? He's like, no. Do you have any interest in doing it? I'm like, yes. And so it's like, all right. That's how, the inception for SignTime came about.
Do you want to go over, so I think Japan specifically as a market has a need for this.
Yeah.
And maybe if we could dive into some of those unique points that make this like kind of a necessity here and how the pandemic kind of accelerated this.
Well, what you saw during the pandemic is a fair number of people had the ability to leverage existing assets to go into some sort of remote work, right? Now, you can argue about was it under-functional or under this or that, sure. But at the end of the day, a lot of those things were, they were already in pipeline for a lot of things, that's right? Yeah. And then there were some others that were like, you know what, we had this on our 2024 roadmap and it's now moved to 2020. So that sorted out reasonably well. But nobody, and I mean nobody, was looking at signing documents in the office. And so what you had was in the middle of the pandemic, when you don't want people traveling on public transportation, which is how most people would work. You had people coming to the office once, twice, 3, 4 times a month to put their physical stamp on a document, their hanko. And
can I pause right there? Just
sure.
Maybe if we can get like a little description about like what a hanko is.
Sure.
Yeah, just to kind of make sure.
Yeah, and actually, usually what I've been doing when I've been talking to people in the U.S., I usually bring one with me.
That's probably, but we can put one up.
But a hanko is it's a chop or a seal. Yeah, the same way historically in the UK or in Europe, you might have had a signet ring that says this is the king's seal or this is the whatever Earl's seal. In Japan, it was traditionally a small piece of wood with unique initials or a name engraved on it, and it's registered with the government. And so, or let me rephrase that. Companies have one which is registered with the government. And that one that's registered with the government can do almost anything in the company. And the default belief is that that is a true thing that's happened. So you end up with security challenges of if someone steals your physical piece of wood, your physical hanko, then your company's in trouble. Beyond that, though, it's the standard way of signing things. So if a document or a package comes to you that requires a signature, a lot of people just have a smaller non-registered one. They go with that. They put it on the signatory area and they're done. And so that's one of the things that's different about the Japanese market.
Yeah, and I think you bring up an interesting point because it's I don't want to say it wasn't 100% a roadblock, but it's definitely a bottleneck that we've also dealt with, and even me personally, because there are documents that when I have to request them from the company, someone had to come into the office to basically stamp them, and then I can take them to, like, for my daughter's kindergarten. Like, that's one of the things, like, we had to have, it can be a bit slow to adapt, where I've seen now, like, my kindergarten that we moved to recently, it will accept, like, a photocopy, like, as long as it's a printed document that has, but it was a struggle for, like, most of 2020. And so I think that SignTime and kind of that offering that service and having that focus of sort of minimizing paper is amazing. So I don't know if you want to talk about maybe some of the other products that you guys have as well.
Well, I think expanding on that a little bit. I mean, you're talking about your kindergarten experience, right? I think the mental difference for people between signing something with, a cursive signature or something and putting a physical seal or physical mark on it is actually pretty material. So legally in Japan, almost all cases you can use electronic signatures, right? There are a few exceptions, and then there's cases like what you had with the required reading, right? Yeah. So there are things like that, but that's an operational challenge more so than a legal contraction. Right.
Really? I didn't actually realize that. Yeah, because when that meeting happened, when my wife went to that meeting, it was, I was under the impression that had to happen in order for us to even be able to, like, sign the contract. Like, they were legally obligated from.
That's right.
Okay, yeah.
The name's escaping me right now, but it's one of these things where everyone in the real estate industry is aware of it. Yeah. So moving beyond that, though, the biggest challenge that we see is that it's a really low adoption rate right now in the white-collar workforce. There's maybe 30 million Japanese who are white-collar workers, of which, as of the research that we got earlier in the year, about 2% of those people have subscriptions.
Wow.
So, now, we don't know that 100% is the right subscription rate, right? But we know that 2% is too low. Yeah. So, when you look at that, we see a very large opportunity. And so in the course of talking to companies over the last year, there are a couple of things that really come out of many of the conversations. Some of these we go and they're big logos on, one of the other companies, the homepage of their press releases. And we say, okay, well, we see you're using this. How's that going? So, we kind of use that for international contracts. It's like, wait, international? Wait, what about the rest? They're like, no, not so much. Okay, why not? Well, the Kikakubu or the corporate planning goes, we like it. We've used it for a couple of things. Okay. But, the Gemba doesn't like it. Okay. The Gemba is the frontline worker, or it's literally factory floor historically. Okay. Why not? It doesn't feel right. So if you're used to going, bam, when stamping something, when you do a deal, and you don't do that, instead you're kind of doing this weird electronic thing.
It's literally like a copy-paste thing.
And it's a mouse signature, it's a typed thing. Well, that doesn't feel right. Yeah. And so some of the things we've done to adapt to the market have been about enabling that.
That's super interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
And so by removing that issue with, I'll call it look and feel, we've found that people are more willing to consider it. Doesn't mean everyone says, great, you have to have it tomorrow. But that's one of the big things that's come up. Another thing that comes up pretty frequently is people have a very narrow view of what they should be using this kind of service for. They say, well, right, when I do a counterparty contract, 3 or 4 people, big important deals, it's like, well, okay, but when you do an offer letter, or if you do the employee work rules, which you need to track that everyone's received and confirmed and so on and so forth, what do? Oh, well, we just do that by some other method.
Yeah. Usually in person, let's be honest.
Usually print it out. But there's other ways too. Yeah. And that's where I really see the gap in the market understanding right now. It's one of these things where you should be thinking anything that's a legally binding document, you should have this on. Yeah. But instead it's, we've kind of always done it this other way, and we're not sure if delivering paper is, or not delivering paper is sufficient. So
it's so interesting, like, to hear you say this. Is like, it really harkens back to what we were talking about buying a house, because in the States, when I joined my previous company, I think it was all digital already, and that was like 2012. And so and don't think I even ever saw a physical offer letter until I joined like Wahl+Case. Like that was my life. so it's surreal, like just hearing you say those things, because it's so true, and I had never really even considered that it was like a paper process until coming to Japan. And
you're like, well, I just get your email with it.
Exactly.
You go and
100%.
show up for stay here or don't. Maybe work remotely.
I remember feeling proud, like in the States, that I could use Preview to sign documents and no one would know the difference. Like that was like I remember, and I had to do like a training on how to do that with my company before.
Right.
And then coming to Japan, and they were like, it's like literally here's the paper to write this. Like this is like intense. Yeah, so I think SignTime is super interesting. I think a lot of what you're doing has such a huge impact on everyday life here. And previously, we had kind of touched on some products that you guys had in the pipeline. Do you have anything you want to talk about here? Can you talk about?
Yeah, I mean, there's stuff I can talk about. Okay. I think that we're going to see a lot of opportunity over the next couple of years, particularly in workflow.
Yeah.
Right. And when you look at, if you take a couple steps back and you think about digital transformation generally, and I may be stealing this from someone, the first time I ever read about this was Negroponte's book, Being Digital. So that's like 1995 or 4 or some dating device. It's an interesting book in how well he predicted kind of where we're at. The thing about it, though, is that I view it as there's kind of 3 tiers of doing this. There's level 1 DX or level 1 digital transformation, which is take a paper and flip it into something digital, right? Level 2 is where you start to take out pieces from the process. In fact, I think some of the original restructuring terms were about that. Of course, then it turned into meaning fire people in a way that sounds better than saying fire people. But yeah, so, but there's a lot of extra phases in a process that you will have that's physical and atom-based, rather than bit or byte-based, right? And that's the key understanding from Being Digital. He talks about atoms versus bits.
Interesting.
And
I like that perspective. I hadn't heard that before.
Okay. Well, maybe I'm one of the few disciples or acolytes to be.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's plenty of good stuff written since then. Yeah. It just that came out at a time that's very relevant to me. And then the third level is where you get to those systems interacting and doing things that were not possible with atoms, right? And arguably, there's even a fourth level past that where you're creating purely virtual things that are not, not at all related to what you would see. Not only can you not do this physically, you wouldn't want to do it physically. There's no interest, and maybe that's something like NFTs.
Yeah. That's amazing. That's super. I hadn't thought about those, like the tier system kind of that you outlined. I love that perspective. That's like beautiful. I feel like,
Well, I mean, that's Negroponte's key.
It was
it was resonated with me. But,
I think that. Yeah, I love that. And so, NFTs are interesting. I think blockchain in itself has a huge potential. Are you guys working on anything?
Actually, we did a press release on that a month ago or so. We're working with one of the local startups in the world of blockchain and Bitcoin and crypto. And there's some interesting use cases that you run into with what I will call pre-smart contracts. Because smart contracts in the world of blockchain are self-executing against an oracle and so on and so forth. And we're not doing that yet. So we're not taking the contents of the contract to execute. But there's also cases where you may have multi-jurisdictional issues that show up, and neither party really trusts the other, but maybe they'll trust a third party like this crypto exchange's blockchain, the CoinDesk blockchain, the Binance blockchain, or something like that, and you can freely write to them. If you've got a lot of money, I guess you could write to the Ethereum blockchain, but gas fees are pretty expensive, so you may not want to do that.
That's super exciting.
Yeah. So I guess for me, I don't know exactly how it's going to fall out in the future, but there's something there, and we're trying to get in that early and experiment with it and do some interesting things.
That's cool. That's really exciting. I think that I remember when I first heard about blockchain, 2010, and that was like kind of how it was sold. And I think at that point, I was still trying to be a musician. And so for me, like that idea of like being able, like now what's happening with NFTs, like hearing about kind of like predicting that like 10 years ago, I was like so enthralled with it. So it's cool to see that kind of like verification that can happen within blockchain.
Well, I'm actually, in some ways, I'm not a blockchain skeptic per se, but the number of use cases that it applies to are fairly limited because it's energy intensive.
Yeah,
and there are a lot of downsides to it. And the first question I ask is, okay, why don't you do a centralized database? Like I've talked to a number of people, on the Angel side. Why aren't you doing this in a centralized database? Is the first question. And if they say, but blockchain, they're out. And then the second one I would say is, why don't you look at, are you familiar with DNS and how that works?
I'm not.
Okay, the way that like .com and .net and all those work is there's one central name system that is delegated each of those dot things. Right. .net goes to here and .com goes over there. And they are the authority. Okay. So they're the ones that you check. And it's distributed, so there are pieces that keep the network running if you can't reach them. Right. But so blockchain, from my perspective, you have to say, yes, neither of those first two cases are the right ones. And then it turns out there are a lot of cases that that's still interesting and useful. I don't want to spend too long on digital transformation.
I'm kind of interested in this and actually taking a deeper dive. Maybe we can come back to that.
I'll set you up with some people who are way more knowledgeable than I am about this.
That's so interesting. I think that I feel like I'm from that generation who I have a basic understanding of what HTML does, you know what I mean? But anything deeper than that, it was like magic. It just you plugged it in and it worked right by the time I was actively online. And so it's cool to see, it's interesting to learn about stuff like this and even how potentially new technologies like blockchain, if they can get around the energy.
I think the thing though, circling back a little bit to digital transformation and the kind of the tier system I laid out, my view is that a lot of the Japan white-collar workforce is still in that kind of layer 1, maybe layer 2 productivity, right? Yeah. Where it's still okay, we have paper and we're moving to this, or we have fax and we're moving to that. And some of that's regulatory, and like I said before, a lot of it's cultural. And so the opportunities to make those DX flips in Japan is very substantial. Yeah. In fact, in the companies that I've personally angel invested in here, most of them have been focused on that. Actually, the ones that have succeeded have focused on that. A couple of them have failed. I'm not sure they've focused on anything. That's always easy to say when it's not your.
And in hindsight. I think that that's a good point. And so for right now, you feel like SignTime is kind of focused on that tier 1. What would the tier 2 focus look like for you guys? Is that where those pre-smart contracts?
I think that's already, we already have that. I think there are some interesting things you can do with AI around contracts that we're playing with and experimenting. There's also some physical things. Jonathan, my co-founder, and I actually have a jointly authored patent that's underway relating to physical devices, tying back into some of the e-signature things.
Cool.
I can't talk too much more about that, totally. If it's approved, I'll send you the
Perfect. We'll put it in the show notes.
Right.
Awesome.
5 years from now.
We'll get you on again. Hopefully. Awesome. Cool. And so I think SignTime sounds really exciting. I think obviously, as you mentioned, there's a huge opportunity in DX right now. And the next thing I want to talk about is just bringing talent onto your team. I know that we've been working with you guys. What are some maybe tips on the types of talent that you're kind of looking for or that you've hired, that you've been excited about? How are you feeling?